2, 1. All right, it's all yours.
Hey all, this is Anurag Koyyada. I'm one of the directors at the King's College London Blockchain Society, and I'm also a venture development mentor at R3, the world's largest blockchain ecosystem. So today we're going to be talking more about the in real life applications and implications of smart contracts. So whereas earlier you guys heard from Jeremy on the technical side of things and Emilio on the more legal conceptual side of things, I'll be talking more about the real life things to talk about and the more non-ideal situations. So we'll start off briefly about what are smart contracts, right? So you guys already heard about this, but in sum, it's just a piece of code stored on the blockchain that triggers an event B in response to event A, and this happens on the blockchain. So it can really be as simple as retrieving weather data, for example. That's a popular use case. So let's say you set on the blockchain, whenever the temperature crosses 20 degrees Celsius, that you want to deliver ice cream to this house. So you get the data from a weather station saying, okay, it's crossed 20 degrees. Then the activates on the blockchain, it triggers the event B, and then throughout whatever mechanics you've set up, now that ice cream is delivered. Pretty much it just takes the human element out of things. It makes it more quick, it makes it more transparent, and overall it becomes more democratized, which is something I'll talk about later. But specifically, I'm going to be going into 3 different use cases of blockchain and smart contracts more specifically, and I'll be closing off with some predictions on the future and some trends to keep in mind as the industry develops. One last thing before we hop in is going to be what exactly the real life implications of smart contracts look like that might not have been covered by the conceptual side of things, as Amelia talked about. So the 2 biggest things to keep in mind is, one, that smart contracts assume that they're ideal actors and like everyone's behavior is perfect and everything is legally enforceable. This isn't always the case. So the 2 problems I'm going to talk about before diving into the use cases is, one, the quality of input, and second, enforceability. So a little bit more about the first. The main utility of smart contracts is that they can be executed without a physical meeting or interaction per se. This makes the potential for fraud and misrepresentation really high because, in simple, the way I tell most of our clients is that if you have a low quality input, you're going to have a low quality output. There's a big preconception that is wrong, that blockchain makes inputs and just things, data you interact with, better quality. It makes it more useful to you. That's not really true, right? All it is a form of tracking and managing data better, by which you can derive more value from it potentially. But if you input bad quality information to begin with, it's not going to become any more useful now all of a sudden that you use blockchain. If anything, now you can just share your bad information with more people, which probably increases the negative ramifications, if anything. So, and uniquely, blockchain might, in a lot of cases, worsen the quality of input because a lot of people have that preconception. Because right now, when you have lawyers in real life, you can make those gut feeling decisions, right? You can tell if a creditor for some reason does not feel honest. You can tell if you suspect them of something going wrong. You can have that actual interaction, whereas that doesn't happen on the blockchain. And so examples of this, keep in mind for people who are looking into smart contract usage, is how do you really verify something, right? What are the proofs you need to actually do things? For example, part of having a whole triggering of events is that you have to be able to verify something happened to be able to do that second thing. And so given a popular example that I've been working with is the idea of construction, right? Let's say on the blockchain, you say that when this building is built, you have to send me some sensor reading showing that the lights are installed in the right places. And then once we get those like geographic sensor data, then we will pay the money into your account for the job done. Normally that sounds like a super high tech way to do this. You'll say, oh, wow, they're using Internet of Things devices. They're using all these emerging tech things. They can geographically trace that the lights are up. There's that the house isn't going to be built and the lights aren't installed. It has to actually be built. So that's not really the case, right? Like people can just put up lights on metal sticks like a Christmas tree and it would still count. Likewise, let's say you set your initial condition to be sending a photograph on the blockchain to verify you actually built or did a service. Again, can those photos be faked? Can those photos be like, can whatever the photos are detecting, can they be undone after the photo is taken? These are all things to consider about actually using smart contracts and how to make it more reliable, seeing as now there's no human interaction. And the second biggest thing to think about is enforceability. Let's say someone doesn't meet the terms of a contract, or let's say that the contract itself is for some reason flawed. Who enforces it? Seeing as how you never meet the party in person, and a lot of this smart contract work can be international, is it enforceable? And what are the grounds on which you can engage with them? Like, what is your claim to liabilities? I won't go into too much depth this, as Emilio has already covered it. And yeah, that's something more to figure out with your lawyer per se, but it's something to keep at the top of your mind. So going into the three specific use cases that there's a lot of smart contract work in is first the luxury goods, fine art, and generally the provenance sector at large, which is just tracking high valued goods. So in this space, it's really very blockchain conducive in that the moment you buy expensive things or things of value, you're going to want to make sure it's real, make sure it retains that value, and make sure that you actually control it. So you know what's happening, you know the information, you know its whereabouts, so forth, so on. And so what a lot of companies have been doing in specifically the fine art and designer goods space is they've been using blockchain as in a few ways, really. So one, there is the topic of digital certificates. When you buy a good, let's say you buy a $1,500 watch from Breitling, for example, now they will give you access to a digital code, which you can go on a website, you can access it, and you'll have a digital passport per se, saying that, okay, you own this watch, this is your unique certificate, you get a unique code, and every time you do something to the watch, every time you get a repair or manufacturing change from the manufacturer, they will update your digital passport record with proof of work done, as well as just proof of something affecting this product. And so this is a really interesting use case because it has a few ramifications. One, people now have a metric beyond some piece of paper that's possibly forgeable to show that their high value goods are real. So this means in the future, perhaps it might be easier to get lower insurance rates from banks when you keep it in storage because now you can prove it's real. Perhaps this makes it easier to resale in the secondhand market because now you can show it's verifiable. In terms of the perfume industry, let's say once you run out of the actual scent, you can go back, you can get it refilled, and perhaps you'll get discounts because now you can prove that this has always been mine, or I got this through a trusted source. And so some examples in the industry are Artery, which is one of the clients you work at or work with the KCL Blockchain Society. Right now, they have created a ledger that stores and logs fine art from various auction houses. So right now they're partnered with Sotheby's and Christie's. And for about $300 million worth of art, you can go on their platform if you're an appraiser or a museum owner. You can enter the name of a painting or log your own, and you can see the past transactions, the past price data, everything about it really. And where smart contracts come into play is twofold. So one, it's in terms of maintaining the proof of all of this information, because whenever you transact or let's say sell or buy a piece of art from the platform, then where the smart contract comes into play is that anytime there's a problem in the future, like let's say a painting turns out to be a forgery, this allows you to show where the liability falls. You can show everyone who has certainly been involved with this piece of art, and it operates more of a supply chain tool per se. And so it's more of just a matter of showing proof of interaction. And the second place, which is the much bigger and arguably more important involvement of smart contracts, is in terms of KYC and AML law. So this stands for Know Your Consumer and Anti-Money Laundering Law. This is important because in a lot of industries, it's not just regular buyers buying things. It can be people from sanctions who are on sanctions lists, people who are from organized crime, people who use this as a way of funneling their money into legitimate sources. And so, for example, in Europe, a big piece of legislation recently has been 5-AMLD, or the fifth directive on anti-money laundering. And so where smart contracts comes in here and play with luxury goods and fine art is that the 5-AMLD mandates that for every piece of art or luxury good, mostly fine art, sold over $10,000, extra know your consumer checks have to be done, just so you can really ensure that it's not terrorists buying your art so they can keep their dirty money clean. And smart contracts really help with this because once you buy a piece of art and once you sell it to other people, because the blockchain keeps a track of the record of ownership, it makes it really easy when it comes to auditing by these external parties to make sure who has been in contact with this piece of work and who has been who might be liable and who might be doing these sort of like illicit activities. And another example is Ariani. They do something similar but less on the AML KYC front. They merely offer a supply chain tracking platform for a lot of luxury goods firms. So right now they're working with Richemont, which is the parent company of Cartier, Montblanc, a lot of the high-end companies. And likewise with Breitling, it's a lot of just bringing in the inherent value of wanting to know what your valuable goods are actually doing. Another industry where smart contracts have been big is the financial technology space. And like I hinted at before, the main utility here comes down to supply chain. Everyone knows that to some extent, time is money. And seeing as how smart contracts literally save hours, if not days or weeks of time, just because you don't have to have people physically meeting up to sign documents or anything. You don't even have to have people e-signing on DocuSign, for example. If you have a nuanced enough smart contract and you figure out the required inputs that would justify moving on like immediately to the next step of any project, then you could engage a smart contract, and without having any human interaction, the whole process would be automated. And that saves a lot of time at industries which have a lot of bureaucracy. For example, central banks have been looking into blockchain heavily and the use of smart contracts to see how they can streamline their operations, as well as better operate with international players. Because when even I like trying to schedule these calls with the conference, time zones is a very big issue. So the fact that you don't have to figure out a call with people on 4 different time zones to figure out a legal contract, whereas you can just figure out the nuances on a smart contract online through the technical teams, and it's automated and done without you, is a very big value add for a lot of these companies. And another space in the more private sector side of things, okay, these are quite big words, but there's things called collateral mobility and HQLA, which are high quality liquidity assets. So in some, these are sort of terms that big banks, they call GSIB banks, global significantly important banks use. It's the type of assets that help banks figure out how much money to keep on hand when people want to withdraw funds. So let's say a bank has $100 in its bank. They might have a requirement to keep $20 on hand at all times that they can't loan out or do anything with in case people want to withdraw money. The use of blockchain here is that it might be possible for banks to pool together their resources. So if one bank ever for some reason has a big issue, they can more easily draw on help from others. this like helps them sidestep things like what happens with the Lehman Brothers and help avoid some more large scale financial problems. And another use case has been looked into is something called CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. So in the US, for example, the last chairman of the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission left his post specifically to figure out the future of a US federal government backed central cryptocurrency. And so there's a lot of traction around this space, even in other countries, for example, in China, in France, that everyone has been looking into if companies can really, and governments too, can somehow collaborate to make a private public approach to formalizing this whole cryptocurrency and blockchain craze, especially with the coronavirus. CBDCs are seen as a way to get away from the crashing of all conventional currencies right now and really get into the whole area of cryptocurrencies, which are doing quite well despite the coronavirus. And as for examples, HQLAX and R3 are two firms that work more with the interbank operations. R3 being an ecosystem that has many dozens of financial institutions and tech companies and is as part of its partnership. And they run an ecosystem where they partner and almost incubate startups for the future of financial technology. We have Emerge, which is a startup in Latin America that is heading a lot of the fintech operations and CBDC research. So right now we're helping them with some work in Honduras. And lastly, yeah, we have the DDF, or Digital Dollar Fund, which is the name of the firm that the US CFTC chair is operating, Chris Giancarlo. Lastly, we're going to talk about governance, IP, and law technology. Law tech, legal tech, very close. The distinguishment isn't as important. But the big takeaway here is that with smart contracts, it introduces a new legal question in that, so first, organizationally, in that it changes lawyers' jobs a lot, because now they don't have to spend hours and hours actually writing out and processing different documents, because any good structured smart contract will already have included in it what exactly counts as a valid data input and what the forms of verification are, which means like document review and a lot of things that the time is spent on right now in the legal practice are rendered much less important. So we see in a lot of law firms, there's a lot of differences in hiring practices already, as even like AI also has been affecting how exactly law firms split their time. So one example is Capix Move, which is a startup in London right now. They've partnered with 5 of the top 10 law firms by size in London. And right now, what they're doing, along with Nivara, another UK-based startup, is they're trying to digitize legal documents, specifically when it comes to things like bond issuance, private placement deals, things like that, that normally take a lot of hours of recursive research. But via using AI and blockchain and other emerging techs, they're able to do it in a transparent method and really streamline the whole process. So, because at the end of the day, like I said before, time is money for a lot of these big companies. And beyond that, on a more small scale too, and perhaps arguably more exotic, blockchain has a big role in terms of things like intellectual property. For example, a project we're working on with the Berklee School of Music and MIT is called the Radar Project, as part of their Open Music Initiative. So an example of what we're trying to address is, right now with the rise of programs like Spotify and Apple Music, it's quite hard for independent producers or artists, or even some well-known ones for that matter, to get paid for their fair contribution to a song. And what the aim of Radar is by when you upload the song itself, you at that point update everyone's contributions to the songs on the blockchain, so everyone can clearly see what's happening, so that whenever payment is due, it's publicly available who is getting what proportion of the money, whereas compared to how much every individual actually contributed to the piece of work too. So it also plays into the whole democratization issue in that it's publicly verifiable, which drives more fair access, and ideally it reduces the amount of legal suits and so forth in the future. And lastly, I'll talk a bit about Electus, which is a e-governance startup coalition per se out of France and broader Europe. We've gotten some international partners, but the utility there is recognizing blockchain's value in terms of really e-governance and more specifically e-voting. So for example, we were running off the Tezos protocol, and last month we had a test vote where we had people from over 8 or 9 different countries as part of the base of participants from universities in the US, including Stanford, NYU. In Europe, we have King's College, we have Edinburgh, Sorbonne. We had people from Mexico to all the way to Japan. And it was pretty much just showing the effectiveness and the need for an international but still secure voting system, especially given the coronavirus epidemic. It's more and more important trying to figure out how we can keep normal societal processes running properly, even when you can't actually go out and do them the way you would normally do. And so this is one example of how blockchain can really help us address problems and keep society functioning even when it really isn't. So crowd management at worst, but the promotion of democracy and modernization of it at best. And yeah, lastly, in terms of how the legal industry has been seeing smart contracts as a whole, is that they've really been taking a hold of it. We've seen big law firms, and I keep drawing on the UK because that's where King's is, but we've seen firms like Allen and Overy, which is a Magic Circle law firm, and Hogan Lovells, which is more technology focused. They've ended up starting their own incubators called Fuse and the Global FinTech Mentor programs, respectively, where they take in a lot of these startups and they guide them through all the steps. And they've been on the forefront of leading a lot of the legal tech and smart contract in general development. And to close, we'll talk a bit about the future of standardization and what the prospects are like for the future. Standardization-wise, like Emilio hinted on earlier, we've seen the formation of a lot of consortium groups. So groups like R3, groups like MOBI, groups like the Global Blockchain Legal Consortium. These are just groups of companies who have figured out, okay, there's some value in blockchain, except the standards have not met the detection of that value. Whereas it's because in some places government is slow, in other places people haven't figured out if blockchain is worthwhile enough to consider beyond like the cryptocurrency use case. It's all still very fluid. And so to replace the lack of a public response, private firms have been manifesting their own. And so in some places that's led to, for example, R3. They've been leading a lot of the central bank digital currency research, and they've been outlining the market strategy for central banks in Thailand and Singapore, for example, because the governments there recognize there's value, but at the end of the day, that the private sector is more innovative and has more value add at the moment. And so consortiums definitely are on the rise, and I suspect they'll only be further on the rise. Same with R3, seeing as how they're the biggest network of financial and largely Corda or transaction-based blockchain firms. They're also playing an increasingly big role, especially in terms of just influence in the industry. For example, they conducted the first blockchain-based securities transfer earlier in the year, so which has been big in the financial industry. Second, there has been an increase in youth-led groups. So for example, Electus is a university-led project at the moment. And like I said, pushing the future of e-voting. I think that's something that we're going to see in other industries as well. For example, seeing as how millennials are very big in terms of trying to use technology to address big overarching problems in society. Wouldn't be surprised if there's at least a few moves made there. For example, there's a firm called the Fabricant in Amsterdam right now is looking into using blockchain and other emerging tech to host fashion runway shows online and really move the whole fashion process digitally to cut down on the environmental effects and really pander to the whole green initiative and more sustainable feelings of the youth population. So there's definitely like a lot of work to be done, but those are two places I see a lot of growth for sure. Lastly, for prospects for the future about blockchain and smart contracts specifically, is that a lot of the consortium work has been standards focused for now. And that's good because smart contracts are, it sets standards for how smart contracts should be functioning. Like I said, everyone has different opinions on how exactly smart contracts should verify what happens and how events should be addressed when triggering responses. But through increased standardization, then we see that the public and private sectors can agree on how smart contracts are best utilized. This is good because one, it increases consistency amongst every different party in the market, which makes it a lower barrier to entry for startups and other innovation, which is generally good for the economy. But even beyond that, when it comes to more youth-led initiatives, where smart contracts come into play is that seeing as how much of the youth-led initiatives are somewhat democracy or transparency focused, a lot of what smart contracts do is democratize access or make sure everyone has equal say and equal stake, which is very useful because much of the future from here on forth, especially in terms of how society interacts with government and other large parties, comes down to the flow of information. If you know what's happening, then you can take a role, take a stance. And that's something that blockchain really facilitates. It gives people access to actually know what's happening. And smart contracts at the end of the day are the crucial part of that. They define a lot of the intellectual property rights. They define a lot of access to information. And at the end of the day, whatever happens with smart contracts and the utilization in industry is going to be affecting how they actually roll out the dissemination of information here on out. And yeah, hopefully this all provides some more insight regarding the more IR or more real world implications of smart contracts and blockchain more generally, as opposed to Emilio's more conceptual and academic view and Jeremy's more technical. Yeah. Roshan, I have no idea how to end this.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think Tyler already sort of did end, and you don't really have to do anything else. I'm not sure what Tyler said, but yeah, he'll edit all of this in there, so I'm gonna stop recording.